Have you ever had somebody try to control something they didn't own? Not because they were confused, but because they genuinely believed everything around them should belong to them? I wish I was exaggerating. Because 3 years ago, a man I'd never met before tried to fine me for solar panels sitting on land his neighborhood association had absolutely no authority over. Then he tried to threaten me. Then he tried to drag me into court. And eventually, he made a mistake so arrogant it ended up costing him everything. My name is Ryan Mercer, and this whole mess started because my wife Emma and I want a quiet life. About 10 years ago, we bought 6 acres just outside a small southern town. Not the kind of place people move to because it's trendy. The kind of place people move to because they want to be left alone. Back then, there were fields in every direction. You could stand on our back porch at sunset and hear nothing except wind moving through tall grass and the occasional cow somewhere off in the distance. I had spent almost 2 decades working in IT infrastructure, staring at monitors and answering emergency calls at 2 in the morning because some server decided to die at the worst possible time. Emma worked remotely as an illustrator, so location didn't matter much to her. What mattered was freedom. We built our house carefully. Solar panels, battery storage, rainwater collection, a greenhouse, a vegetable garden, a small chicken coop. Nothing extreme, nothing illegal. Everything permitted, inspected, documented, and approved. Friends used to joke that if civilization collapsed, they'd be driving straight to our property. For the first few years, life was exactly what we'd hoped for. Peaceful, simple, predictable. Then everything around us changed. A developer purchased nearly 400 acres bordering our land and announced a master plan community called Willow Creek Estates. Within months, bulldozers arrived. Trees disappeared. Roads appeared. Streetlights went up. Then came rows and rows of nearly identical houses. Gray roofs, white fences, tiny yards, perfectly measured landscaping. The kind of neighborhood where every mailbox looked like it had been printed from the same machine. The development came with an HOA, of course. That didn't concern me. Our property existed long before the subdivision. Our deed was separate. Our parcel was separate. Our attorney confirmed it. The county confirmed it. Everybody confirmed it. We were neighbors to the HOA, not members. Big difference. At first, the people moving into Willow Creek were friendly enough. Families would walk by and ask questions about the garden. Kids loved seeing the chickens. Some of the homeowners even asked for advice about solar power because electric rates kept climbing. Then a man named Grant Holloway moved into the neighborhood, and everything changed. Grant was the kind of guy who always looked like he was headed to a board meeting. Pressed polo shirts, expensive watch, perfect haircut, permanent expression of mild disappointment. He retired from corporate risk management and apparently discovered that retirement wasn't nearly as enjoyable when nobody was available to supervise. Within 6 months, he became president of the HOA. Within a year, people were afraid of him. Grass too tall? Violation. Trash can visible? Violation. Wrong flower color? Violation. Basketball hoop visible from the street? Violation. I heard stories from homeowners that sounded ridiculous until I realized they were true. One family received a warning because their holiday decorations stayed up 3 days longer than allowed. 3 days. Imagine having enough free time to care about that. Still, it wasn't my problem. At least that's what I thought. One Tuesday afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I assumed it had been delivered by mistake. Then I opened it. The letter stated that my solar array violated community aesthetic standards and must be removed or screened from public view within 30 days. There was also a $50 fine attached. I actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A genuine laugh. Emma read it and laughed too. We figured somebody in the HOA office had mixed up addresses, so we ignored it. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one claimed our chickens violated community livestock restrictions. Another fine. Then another letter. The greenhouse. Then the rainwater tanks. Then the garden fencing. Each notice came with a larger penalty. The total climbed from $50 to $200. Then $500. Then over $1,000. That's when I stopped laughing. I mailed a certified response with copies of our deed, parcel maps, county records, and a very polite explanation that our property was not, had never been, and would never be part of Willow Creek Estates. I thought that would settle it. A week later, I was repairing a gate near the driveway when I heard footsteps crunching across gravel. I looked up. A man in a navy polo was walking toward me like he owned the place. Grant Holloway, the HOA president. He stopped about 10 feet away and looked around my property with visible disgust. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile somebody gives when they think they've already won. Nice setup, he said. Shame it brings down neighboring property values. I remember setting my wrench down and staring at him for a second. Then I asked the obvious question. Why are you on my property? His smile widened. Because according to him, this wasn't over. Not even close. Because according to him, this wasn't over. Not even close. Grant folded his arms and looked past me toward the solar panels glinting in the afternoon sun. You know, he said, most people eventually realize cooperation is easier than resistance. I remember blinking at him for a second, trying to figure out whether he was joking. Cooperation with what? I asked. I don't live in your neighborhood. His smile never moved. You're surrounded by Willow Creek now. Communities evolve. Expectations evolve. I laughed. Actually laughed right in his face. That turned out to be a mistake. Not because I regretted it, but because I think that was the exact moment he decided this had become personal. He left without another word. The trouble started almost immediately afterward. Letters kept arriving. Sometimes 2 in a week. Sometimes 3. The fines grew larger. The language became more aggressive. Then attorneys got involved. The HOA's lawyer sent a formal demand letter insisting that our property was subject to neighborhood restrictions. Our attorney responded with a document so thorough it practically came with its own table of contents. For a few months, everything went quiet. Then the county started showing up. First came an inspector investigating an anonymous complaint about unsafe water systems. Then another regarding building code violations. Then animal control. Then environmental compliance. One morning, Emma looked out the kitchen window and said, either we're running an illegal empire or somebody is making a lot of phone calls. The funny thing was every inspection ended the same way. The officials would arrive, walk around, review paperwork, then leave. One county inspector actually complimented our solar installation. Another asked where we purchased our water filtration system. Every complaint failed. Every single one. But that's the thing about harassment. The goal isn't necessarily to win. The goal is to exhaust you. And honestly, it was working. I was spending hours gathering documents, answering questions, coordinating inspections, and dealing with attorneys. Even when you're right, fighting constantly becomes exhausting. Then Grant crossed a line he never should have crossed. One Monday morning, our attorney called before breakfast. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. Ryan, she said, sit down. Never good words. Turns out the HOA had filed a lien against our property for unpaid fines. Alien, on land they didn't own, land they didn't govern, land they had no legal authority over whatsoever. For a few seconds, I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. What happened next moved fast. The court hearing lasted less time than it took me to drive there. The judge reviewed the documentation, reviewed the property records, reviewed the HOA boundaries, then essentially asked why everybody was wasting his morning. The lien was thrown out immediately. The HOA was ordered to cover a portion of our legal expenses. And for the first time, I thought maybe this nightmare was finally ending. I was wrong. A week later, I ran into Grant at a gas station. I was filling up my truck when I heard somebody call my name. I turned around. There he was, standing beside Pump 6. Same polo shirt, same smug expression, same certainty. He walked over, close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. You got lucky, he said. I shrugged. No, I got property records. His jaw tightened. Then he stepped forward and jabbed a finger into my chest. Not hard enough to be assault, just hard enough to make a point. This isn't over. I still remember those words. This isn't over. Then he walked away. No shouting, no threats, just absolute confidence. Like he believed the universe itself would eventually bend in his favor. The drive home felt strangely quiet. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Emma noticed immediately. We've been married long enough that she can tell when something's bothering me before I even open my mouth. When I told her what happened, she listened carefully. Then she asked a question. What do you think he's actually mad about? At first, I said the obvious answer. The solar panels, the chickens, the property. But the more I thought about it, the less that explanation made sense. Grant didn't care about any of those things. What bothered him was that I existed outside his authority. Everyone else in Willow Creek eventually had to answer to him. I didn't, and he couldn't stand it. That realization changed everything. Because once I stopped viewing him as a rule enforcer and started viewing him as a control addict, his behavior suddenly made perfect sense. A few weeks later, I was having dinner with an old friend named Jason. Jason worked in commercial acquisitions and knew just about everybody involved in regional property management. I was venting about the situation when he nearly spit out his drink laughing. You know what's funny? He said. What? The management company behind Willow Creek is probably worth less than the legal fees you've already spent. I stared at him. What are you talking about? He shrugged. Ever heard of Landmark Community Services? I nodded. They were the management company handling Willow Creek. They processed violations, collected dues, managed vendors, maintained records. Basically the engine behind the HOA. Jason took another sip. I heard the owner wants out. I laughed. Yeah, okay. No, seriously. That conversation should have ended there. It didn't, because once the idea entered my head, it refused to leave. For days I couldn't stop thinking about it. Most people assume HOA boards control everything. They don't. The board makes decisions. The management company makes those decisions happen. Without the management company, the entire machine slows down. A month later, I made a phone call. Then another. Then another. I used a broker. Kept my name out of it. Created a holding company. Asked questions quietly. And little by little, a picture started forming. Landmark Community Services was owned by a man named Walter Green. 68 years old. Health issues. Tired. Burned out. Ready to retire. The business wasn't huge. 12 communities. Stable contracts. Predictable revenue. Nothing flashy. The asking price surprised me. Then my attorney discovered something even more interesting. The management agreement between Landmark and Willow Creek. I still remember sitting in her office while she reviewed the contract. She stopped reading. Went back 3 pages. Read something again. Then slowly lowered the document. Oh, whenever attorneys say, oh, like that, pay attention. What? I asked. She slid the contract across the desk. The agreement gave Landmark extensive operational authority, financial audits, vendor oversight, compliance review authority, direct homeowner reporting rights. And then there was the termination clause. That part was incredible. If the HOA wanted to terminate the management company, they had to provide 18 months' notice and pay substantial termination penalties. In other words, whoever owned Landmark had far more influence than Grant probably realized. My attorney leaned back. You know what's funny? What? He signed this himself. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt something different. Not frustration. Not anger. Opportunity. 3 months later, I sat across from Walter Green in a conference room downtown. There wasn't anything dramatic about it. No music. No speeches. Just paperwork. Signatures. Handshakes. A wire transfer. Walter thanked me. I thanked him. Then he walked away retired. And I walked out the new owner of Landmark Community Services. The same company that had been helping Grant Holloway wage war against me. That night, Emma poured 2 glasses of bourbon. We sat on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the tree line. After a long silence, she looked at me and shook her head. I still can't decide if this is genius or completely insane. I took a sip. Honestly, I'm not sure either. The next morning, I walked into Landmark's office for the first time as its owner. And before lunchtime, I found something that changed the entire story. The first thing I did after taking over Landmark was exactly what you'd expect. I started reading. Contracts, invoices, board communications, compliance reports, vendor agreements. Years of paperwork stacked inside digital folders most people would never bother opening. I wasn't looking for revenge. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I was looking for context. I wanted to understand how this whole thing had spiraled so far beyond a simple property dispute. The answer showed up faster than I expected. About 2 hours into my review, I noticed recurring payments to a landscaping company called HOA Grounds Management. At first, the name barely registered. Then it hit me. Holloway, as in Grant Holloway. A little more digging revealed the company belonged to Grant's brother-in-law. Interesting. Then I compared invoices. The rates were significantly higher than competing vendors serving nearby communities. That got my attention. Then I found restaurant expenses categorized as community outreach meetings. Thousands of dollars. Steakhouses, private dining rooms, premium liquor charges. The kind of expenses homeowners rarely see because they're buried inside budget summaries. Then came the clubhouse renovation. According to the budget, the board approved security upgrades. According to the invoices, those upgrades somehow included a theater-quality projector, surround sound equipment, and luxury furnishings. Funny thing was most residents weren't allowed to use the clubhouse on weekends because it was constantly reserved for board activities. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Nothing criminal on its face. Nothing dramatic enough for national headlines. But enough questionable spending to make homeowners furious if they ever saw it. Then I opened the compliance records. And that's where I found the part that genuinely bothered me. The field inspectors had documented our property multiple times. Each report said essentially the same thing. Property outside HOA jurisdiction. No action recommended. Case should be closed. Yet every recommendation had been overridden. Not by staff, not by management, by direct instruction from Grant. One email from an inspector named Mike stood out. He wrote, "Continued enforcement against this property may expose the association to liability." No response. Just another order to continue issuing violations. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. For nearly 2 years, people inside the system had known this wasn't right. Nobody stopped it, because stopping it meant confronting the person in charge. A few days later, I met with Mike and another inspector named Sarah. The moment I introduced myself as the new owner, they looked nervous. That changed quickly. I told them enforcement against my property was over effective immediately. Mike literally exhaled, a long breath like he'd been holding it for months. "Thank God," he said. "We knew this was wrong." That sentence stuck with me. We knew this was wrong. The problem wasn't that nobody recognized the abuse. The problem was nobody believed they had the power to challenge it. Then came the moment I've been waiting for. Willow Creek's quarterly HOA meeting. As owner of Landmark, I was required to attend and present operational reports. Normally, somebody else would have handled it. This time I went myself. When I walked into the clubhouse, about 40 homeowners were already seated in folding chairs. Grant sat at the front like a king holding court. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Then our eyes met, and I watched confusion turn into disbelief. The meeting started normally. Budget updates. Maintenance discussion. Committee reports. Then Grant began talking about ongoing enforcement efforts against neighboring properties. Meaning me. Of course. A homeowner raised her hand. "How much money have we spent on legal actions outside the neighborhood?" Grant immediately dismissed the question. "Those details aren't relevant." That was my cue. I stood up. Every head in the room turned. "My name is Ryan Mercer," I said, "and I'm a new owner of Landmark Community Services." The silence that followed felt almost physical. Grant stared at me, completely frozen. You could practically hear gears grinding inside his head. Finally, he managed to speak. "You're joking." "No," I said. "I'm not." Then I opened a binder and started presenting findings from Landmark's financial review. Slowly, calmly, professionally. No drama. Just facts. Vendor payments. Contract discrepancies. Questionable expenditures. Conflict concerns. As each page turned, the mood in the room changed. Confusion became curiosity. Curiosity became concern. Concern became anger. A homeowner near the front interrupted. "Wait, that's your brother-in-law's company." Another person asked why dues kept increasing while community amenities kept deteriorating. Someone else wanted to know why thousands of dollars had been spent at restaurants while the pool remained broken all summer. Grant kept trying to interrupt. kept trying to regain control. But something had shifted. People weren't listening to him anymore. For the first time, they were asking questions. Real questions. Then I showed them the compliance records, the notes, the warnings, the recommendations to stop enforcement against my property, and the repeated overrides. The room erupted. One homeowner stood up. "You cost us legal fees over this." Another shouted from the back. So everybody knew it wasn't even in the HOA. Grant slammed his hand on the table. "This is retaliation." I looked at him. Honestly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I held up the management contract. The same contract he'd signed years earlier. The same contract giving Landmark authority to conduct independent audits and present findings directly to homeowners. His own signature sat right there at the bottom. A board member named Linda looked at him and asked a simple question. "Did you actually read this before signing it?" That was the end. Not officially, but emotionally. The spell broke. Within minutes, a motion for a vote of no confidence was introduced. Homeowners voted. The result wasn't close. Grant lost. Badly. I watched him gather his papers in silence. No speech. No defense. No dramatic exit line. Just a man realizing that authority disappears the moment people stop believing in it. He walked out of the clubhouse and never looked back. The months afterward were surprisingly peaceful. The new board conducted a complete review of association finances. Several settlements were reached. Vendors were replaced. Budgets were corrected. Community facilities were repaired. And, perhaps most importantly, transparency returned. At the next official meeting, the board issued a formal statement acknowledging that our property was not and had never been part of Willow Creek Estates. Not that we needed their permission, but it was nice hearing them finally say it out loud. About a year later, I sold Landmark to Mike, the inspector who'd spent years trying to do the right thing despite pressure from above. He deserved the opportunity more than I did. As for Grant, he sold his house and moved away. I haven't seen him since. Every now and then, I drive past Willow Creek. Kids ride bicycles through the streets. Families walk dogs in the evenings. People wave to each other. It feels like a neighborhood again instead of a kingdom. And our place? Still here. The solar panels are still producing power. The chickens are still making noise. The garden keeps growing. Life moved on. But every once in a while, I think about the question people always ask when they hear this story. Did I go too far? Maybe. Buying an entire company because one HOA president couldn't stay in his lane definitely isn't the most normal solution to a problem. Maybe there were easier ways. Maybe there were cheaper ways. Maybe I escalated something that should have stayed inside a courtroom. Or maybe some people become so comfortable hiding behind systems that the only way to stop them is to learn the system better than they do. Honestly, I still don't know. And that's why I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have kept fighting through lawyers and court filings? Would you have ignored him and hoped he eventually gave up? Or would you have done exactly what I did and stepped inside the machine itself? Let me know down in the comments. Because sometimes justice looks a lot different depending on which side of the fence you're standing on. And I have a feeling this story is going to divide people right down the middle.